Yes, hi, and welcome to the Scientist Sage Sangha. And tonight we're talking about anti-fragility. Now, this is a really interesting topic, and I'm not going to do it deep level justice, but I will hope to share with you an idea of it so that you might put it to use. Because it took me about couple weeks to read all the research and understand the graphs and all that sort of thing. And you don't actually need to do that to put it to use in your life. So we're just going to go straight to the useful part. So the idea of anti-fragile, thinking about fragility existing on a continuum where one part is fragile and then another part is robust, which just means like a fragile thing, if there's a circumstance happen that an unfortunate circumstance, fragile things break and resilient things bounce back, but anti-fragile things actually improve with whatever the stress or event is. And there's another idea that's similar to that in psychology called post-traumatic growth. And we don't hear as much about it because post-traumatic growth isn't seen in treatment rooms as much. But there are a lot of people that experience a traumatic event and they actually grow from it. And so that idea of post-traumatic growth is what anti-fragility is all about. And there's lots of things that make up anti-fragility. But one of the things, there's some psychological ideas and some practical ideas that we're going to weave our way through and get you some understanding of it. So one of the ideas that is really problematic and makes things very fragile is the idea that there is one way that things should be. Because that's just, going to send you looking for trouble. Because if I think things have to be a certain way to be okay, then I'm going to be disappointed more of the time than not, because everything changes all the time. And that's been in practice, the awareness of it since, probably the last 5,000 years when the Buddhists are talking about impermanence. But in our culture right now, we do have this idea about this is how it should be. One of the places I've seen it most right now is when I'm talking to teenagers and young adults, and they have an idea that their life should go A, B, C, and they're just going along in that way. And that if they go and do this, and if they go and do that, and if they get this course and go to that school, they will get this degree and they'll get that job, and everything will be this kind of straight line kind of idea. And that actually makes their lives far more fragile. If they don't get into that school, or if they don't get that grade, or if they don't get that job. And so a lot of the time they spend is worrying about those things not happening. And so it starts snowballing and creating this worry effect that actually worry is shown in biological terms as making your body more fragile. The worry chemicals that go into your body are problematic, and they literally make your body more fragile. So this idea about this is how things should be. Think of this as a rigid thing, and rigid things are usually more fragile, like a wine glass. If you drop a wine glass on the floor, it's really likely going to break. And that's what a rigid idea works like too. It makes things very fragile. And then the idea that we can control these things if we just try to. And so there is this effort at controlling everything, which again, actually makes us more fragile. And it doesn't mean that we don't take action, like say putting on a seatbelt when you get in the car, things like that. But there's a level at which that we pass pretty low, and we are having more problems than positive outcomes from all of our worry and preparedness and all of that sort of thing. And it sort of piggybacks on the anxiety. So anxiety happens and we try and control everything, and then more things happen and more anxiety happens. So it escalates to where we are not seeing things clearly. And so we get more fragile. And so when we talk of that, there's this idea of a rigid solution. We're going to control it. We just do the control, will be okay. So rigid problem, rigid solution gives us more fragility. So then we proceed to intervene without thinking really if we should intervene. So some examples of this, and there's Nassim Taleb that wrote a book about antifragile. He talked about a number of things like using antibiotics. And if we use antibiotics too much, the bugs become stronger. So this is what he would call a naive intervention, that if we intervene in this way, trying to control all of those things, we can create more problems in the long run without intending to. So it's really, and a lot of the time we intervene with things without considering the longer term consequences. Helicopter parenting is one of those things. We don't want to see our children in pain. And so we try and make their world cotton wrapped. And we create more problems like that. I have a very vocal son that says, yeah, if you would have let me do that then. So I get lots of feedback about this, where I did it a little better, a little less. But that idea of not letting children learn from their mistakes, or not let them fall and get hurt, those kinds of things, and let them pick themselves up, or have friendships that don't go well, all sorts of things like that, trying to organize everything in their lives. And then that leads them into the ideas we were talking about everything, there's a way that everything should be. And so if as a parent, I think there's a way that everything should be, and I try and make it be that way, instead of just being present with each event that's coming up and sort of walking alongside my child, helping them investigate their own ways of moving through it, and making suggestions and the exploration of it as opposed to the dictation of it. So there is an interesting thing like that. It's not that we don't want any interventions, we just want thoughtful interventions. And so there may be something, if I have a lot of dog hair on my floor, I might want to vacuum it up. We're not talking about, but if I just do that mindlessly and don't realize that maybe it isn't working, that I need a different kind of vacuum, or maybe I need to brush the dog, I can do other things too. So again, it's not about not intervening, it's about thinking about intervening and being in the process in a very present way, seeing what's working, seeing what's not, and what are the outcomes if I'm making a situation more fragile. The other one with kids, just off that, is exposure to germs. A lot of allergies and things like that are thought to be the lack of exposure to germs in our society. And when the pandemic was at its height, people wore masks and didn't go around other people and that sort of thing. And many, many people found once they were exposed to people again, that they caught every little thing that was going around, that their resilient system didn't get any exposure, didn't get any stress to it. So it didn't build any anti-fragility. So interesting ways to think about this sort of thing, because what we're looking for more is building in things like redundancy. So maybe I will send my children to a park nearby where I have seen them play before, and I maybe walk them through it and say, careful when you're climbing on that, because that's a little bit slippery, or that sort of thing. And then I tell them, tell the older brother, take care of the younger brother when they go there. So there's different ways of being present in a situation and building in some redundant safety factors. And we do that, they do that in cars and buildings and all sorts of things. There are that redundancy. And it isn't because we necessarily think something bad is going to happen, but we are just being present in this, not over the top, like bubble wrapping a child before they're allowed to go to the playground, but being present and just considering. The curiosity and creativity are really useful things when we're doing this. So that's the idea of that, because we want our situations, ourselves, our businesses, our world to evolve. We don't want to just keep it in the same bubble. And so when we have that redundancy, we can move forward and we can evolve. We can still have some failures, so to speak. The child may fall off a swing and break an arm, and that can happen, but we'll work with that and we'll go forward. So we'll have those evolutions. And other people than me might, if they broke an arm, not get back on that swing. But some of us have to go at it a little longer and harder. But I am learning so much about the second broken leg. I had so much skill learned from the first one, so we're getting good information here. But literally, it's about allowing small errors, not about not having any errors or accidents, because those will always be there. If you're breathing, you are going to have errors and accidents. But often in our culture, like if somebody makes a bad investment idea or a bad relationship choice, often we can carry that around like a stone around our necks. And we can't recover from things when we do that. And so the idea that there will be failures just as part of life. And it's more about how we meet the next situation, how we evolve through it, rather than, oh my God, how can I avoid it? So it really is about being present. I was surprised because when you start listening to this man speak, because he's very technical and from the business sector, and there's lots of math and charts and things, you don't think it is about that, but it very much is about being present, to pay attention to everything that's going on in your life and compare things with the immediate thing that's right in front of you, with the backdrop of your whole life as well. To see, does this make me more fragile, or does this make me more robust, or actually anti-fragile? And what might be an anti-fragile response to this? And the other part that he talks about is about optionality. And really that's talking about opportunities. And so in everything, doesn't matter what it is, there's these opportunities. And people that have robust businesses, that are anti-fragile in their finances, they have lots of different opportunities and options. And so I have a little dog that has a cast on her leg as well, and I have to have lots of options for her because she can't do what a normal little dog does, like run around. But we have lots of options for her to play laying down. We have lots of things for her to investigate instead of run around the house. And it's all about those kinds of options and how we work them into whatever the situation is. There is always more than one way to do things. As I read this information, I really began to understand how well my attention deficit had served me, because I had to find different ways to do things. And so it made me use my creativity and my persistence and all sorts of interesting things that have really served me in the long run. So this idea about allowing small failures and having lots of options. So even in the failure, look at the options. And so there are a lot of people that made a lot of money selling masks in the pandemic. This was, practically a tiny little market off on the side somewhere. But everyone from, seamstresses that were trapped at home to, little drugstores, the corner drugstore suddenly was selling them, so was Costco. And so there was lots of things to be done in the pandemic like that. So many people went online with their workout things or craft projects, things like that. There's always options in every situation, even if the situation itself seems suboptimal. There are always options. And so it's really useful to think about things in that way. And so I boil it down to this idea about don't resist reality. If I come to terms with reality more quickly, I have a better life. I don't spend time resisting it or resenting it, those kinds of things that dump poor chemicals into my body. I start being conscious and creative and just present with what's going on. And so that's what we're looking about to see what where I'm fragile and where I could be more filled with options or build in some redundancy. And it might be part of the idea here that he presents about anti-fragility is that you can help by what he calls curbing your downside. So curbing your downside is if we sit around and worry a lot, which lots of us do, when we sit around and worry, we are practicing our failures. Oh, maybe I'll lose all my money, or I won't have any friends, or I'll never have another love, or all sorts of things like that. But he suggests if you're going to practice both the problem and a solution, or the failure and the recovery. Like if I lost all my money, what would I do? And it can be in terms of practical things like, I would start selling firewood door to door, or I would, move into a collective or whatever those things are, but also in the idea of your heart. And so if I believe in myself, then I am very strong-hearted. And from my growing up with ADD and not sort of fitting in very well, I really had to develop that faith in myself. And as a really little girl, I had this picture of a princess that had sort of fairy guides. And so I had these other supports outside, but really I was a fairy princess. And even when things were bad, I was a fairy princess awaiting my delivery, and I was smart and I could escape. And having that narrative in my head primed me. And it's something that I did for my children. I would tell them bedtime stories using their names, and they would get to pick out strengths that they had. Maybe they were smart, or they were strong, or they were swift. And we would tell stories about those things where they would get into trouble and then they would get out of trouble. And that's the kind of stories we need to tell ourselves, to not just focus on the things that could go wrong and are bad, but wow, if this is what I'm worrying about, what can I think about how it might go well? And the more I think about that in a more balanced way, the more likely I am going to be willing and able to take steps in a direction to have things work out well. And at the very least, I stop those bad chemicals in my body that make my body start to be more tired and break down and be more inflamed and all of those things when I'm doing that nonstop rumination. So that idea there, and seek what they call eustress. And eustress is the amount of stress that we can put on ourselves in any sort of way. It could be physically, weightlifting. It could be running intervals. It could be studying hard. It could be playing, oh my God, what's the game? It's a game for your brain. We'll get someone to tell us what the name of that is when we go live here. That there are all sorts of brain games and those kinds of things that will develop us, and that's called eustress. So it's not something that will cause you so much stress that you flip into that distress mode in your body, but enough stress that it'll make your muscles develop, it'll make your brain develop a little bit, all of those kinds of things. So not avoiding stressful things, but being clear that you don't put yourself under this sort of unlimited stress, or things like the idea that I'm going to spring clean all of my house, every room, every drawer this weekend. That's not eustress, that's bad stress. So you want to make the stress match your capabilities, because a lot of the time people are pushing far too hard, like this idea there's one way to have it be, and if I work hard enough I can make it be that way. That takes you out of eustress and into negative stress that starts burning out your body and your dopamine and your will and your hope. And so we want to stay away from that ledge. We want to fit the stress to our capabilities, whatever they are at the moment, okay, because they change. And to overcompensate in the way of like overlearning things. And I might have one friend that might help me if I need it. But if I have another friend with backup there, then I feel more comfortable. And so we overcompensate in a positive way, not in a compulsive way. We don't got to draw a line there. Not in a compulsive way, like it'll never be, and I can make it all be all right, but just like, okay, it's this idea of thinking in my head, like, oh, what if I need this? And so I might go, oh, okay, I need a ride to the hospital that day. I'm going to see if so-and-so can do it, and I'm going to see if this other person might be able to as well. Or I might see how much is an Uber to go to the hospital if they can't take me. And so it's those small expansions and options that we keep in there. We talked earlier about optionality, and it is just about having options. That makes us less stressed. And the idea that we are not just surviving, that we are actually evolving. So I'm not just looking to get through this, whatever it is. He calls them black swan events because they're very unpredictable and unlikely. We don't know when they're going to happen. You know, seeing a black swan is a rare event. And so we can go, okay, maybe that's happening, but maybe I have right here and now a black swan event. How am I going to work through it? And for myself, the advent of 2 broken legs in the first 6 months of the year here, I really had to look at what was going okay. And one of the benefits was I had all the equipment I needed when I broke my second leg. And look at the good side of it. I didn't break my second leg until the first broken leg was quite well healed. But looking at those kinds of things, really putting ourselves in a positive orientation to what's going on and looking into it. And I was dealing with pain the other night, and I'd had a very painful night, and I had just drowned, lost hopelessness, everything. So the next thing, I'm like, okay, could be like that again, but I'm going to go into it a little differently. I'm going to go into it with an experimenter mode. What can I use here? What are the possibilities? And so I went into it with that, and I had some amazing discoveries about things, and things that really worked and things that didn't work so well, and things I could do with my mind and things that I could do with my body. And so it was just an exploration, and I got some rest, and I was much calmer than coming out of a night of just trying to fight the pain, fight reality, basically. And so it isn't that we don't do things about things. It's about the way that we do those things. If we do it with only control in mind, and it's a pass, fail, win, lose, fail, succeed kind of way, and we're not learning, we're not developing options, and we're not just being present, it can be a long, difficult life. But if we are growing our antifragility, it can be amazing. So I just want to invite you into literally thinking about places where you feel fragile and places where you feel that you are maybe anti-fragile, and how that happened, how that evolved in your life. Most of us find that there were some difficult things that we came through that benefited us at this point. I was going to talk briefly about addiction, and addiction being that problematic thing that we want to fix, and then we'll feel better and we believe it will make us stronger, but it doesn't in the long term. It makes us weaker. And where might you get into that sort of thing, where one of your solutions might not be working so well as a solution for you? And just being aware of those things. So we're just going to take about 4 minutes. Take a deep breath and relax some of that. And just notice as you just even relax in your body, how that can make you feel less fragile. So just taking a couple of deep breaths can make you feel less fragile. And if you entertain this contemplation of things that maybe you feel fragile about, and it could be one of the things that I have fragility around are people's comments. And I've had that since I was a little kid. I would tune into a tone of voice or a look on their face when they said something. And I found out later on that there was an actual name for what I was experiencing, and it was called rejection sensitive dysphoria, where my perception was different than the reality a lot of the time. And I was like so surprised to hear about that, but it made so much sense. And so if I go through with the idea that I'm going to be rejected all the time and that sort of thing, that makes me so much more fragile because my brain is actually looking for the problem. But if I breathe into my body and I have planned to go into life, whether I'm talking to someone at the bank or maybe driving to a new trip that I don't know, I haven't driven before, or maybe I'm looking for a job or trying to figure something else out. If I can go into it with the idea that I can expand and curiosity will help me explore and find a positive path through whatever I'm looking at, I help make myself much less fragile in this circumstance. If I feel compulsion in my body or that rigid thinking, like it has to turn out this way by this time, I can help myself release that. And it might just be by changing wording in my head a little bit. Like, I wonder what this will be like. If I'm working through some physical or emotional pain, I might open up and just ask, I wonder what could help me move through this in a positive way. Or what could I find growth in this experience? But all the same things that we have been doing through a number of other topics about releasing our bodies, expanding our minds, and just being very present are the exact things that help us develop anti-fragility as well. And especially so when there may be a space in our life where we feel very fragile. Not to force ourselves to suck it up and, march on through, but just to be present and curious and soften into those moments of fragility to see how we can evolve. So just take a couple more breaths and imagine yourself as that strong person, or in my case, as that strong princess, whatever works for you. With an eye for opportunity. And a desire for evolution. And just entertaining the idea that we can grow into anti-fragility, grow into making use of everything that happens for us, for our own evolution. Okay. Now, I hope that you can feel some peace with whatever you chose to explore. And thank you so much to everyone that joined us tonight, the people that are with us live that we'll go into discussion with shortly, and those of you that are watching this later. The Wise Heart Wellness Scientist Sage Sangha is so happy that you've joined us tonight. And please feel free to send questions and comments to scientistsage@gmail.com for future ideas or questions about things we've discussed. Thanks again for joining us. I am with you. You are with me. Blessed be.